Manchester is red, as Michael Carrick's United came out as deserved winners in the Manchester derby with a 2-0 victory. This was a highly competent out-of-possession performance, as despite only having 32% of the ball, the Red Devils still dominated on the XG front. So what exactly were the tactics from both sides? Let's dig in. What was most impressive is just how clear United's out-of-possession game plan was, and that began from the City goal kick, where the Blues looked to split their centre-backs with Rodri as their only pivot. But United had already identified their target, as young Max Alleyne was firmly in their crosshairs. United would stagger their press. Fernandez's only goal was to tie up the solitary pivot, but crucially, Mbeumo's attention would be on Kuchanov, and naturally, this meant that the only easy outlet option was the young Englishman, who seemed uncomfortable all game. As Ake was initially pushing high up the pitch, and Mainu and Casemiro were backing up the press in the midfield, making it man-to-man, there were rarely options for the centre-back, often forcing him into hopeful long balls up the pitch. Although it must be noted that at times, even under limited pressure, he still struggled to make the correct decision, eventually culminating in him being substituted. Pep spent a lot of the half looking for solutions to this dynamic, be it Bernardo dropping into the left-back position to give Alleyne an easy option who could be trusted under pressure. Or, alternatively, taking slightly more risks in possession, as if City did take the risk of going central with their first pass, even with the pivot under pressure, now Rodri would have two options for the next pass, which could lead to Kuchanov being the man to get on the ball instead. And both of these ploys did work to a certain extent to progress the ball at times, but not to fully pierce the United press. And once again, even when City were in the middle third, United's defensive structure was clear, effective, although not perfect. The Reds utilised a 4-4-2 mid-block, and against this more standard shape, like we've seen in the past couple of matches, Pep was willing to move away from his 2026 tactics and look to the past instead. It was a reincarnation of the 3-4-3 diamond, as Ake tucked in and Rico Lewis moved to the right side of the diamond. And on paper, this could have been highly effective, with City having potential overloads here as well as here simultaneously, especially because unlike most teams in 2026, United weren't ridiculously man-oriented, with their centre-backs pushing up onto the half-space men. And City did have success at times if the front two were drawn high onto the centre-backs, as that would mean that now if Rodri were found, the potential to find a man between the lines was immense, as when he was closed down, one of these three men could then be free. But again, United were working as a unit, and they accounted for this, through Patrick Dorgu being one of the few players who was much more man-oriented, and he would tuck in with the right back, making it much harder to develop an overload in these positions. However, like we've touched on, against a City side, it's unrealistic to expect them to have no answers for a defensive game plan, and the key came from the wide centre-backs, and Kuchanov in particular. He was aggressive in pushing up the pitch, so much so that United often ended up being 3 versus 2 down in these areas. So if Dorgu stayed here, Shaw would have been 2 versus 1 down out wide. So we would see the Dane be drawn to the ball, and this spelled danger. If the remaining midfielder did not shift across in time, it meant that the left back was still completely isolated against these two men instead, and we saw Rico Lewis get into some of the most dangerous positions in the half space for City in this exact manner. But as the game progressed, rather than looking to engage the citizens so high up the pitch and risk these gaps growing, instead of being more aggressive in that mid-block, they were much more willing to drop into a deeper 4-4-2 and completely compact this space between the lines. So even if men were drawn out, there was virtually no room to play into. But let's take a step back and address a couple more things about the City build-up, because one of the key reasons that United were able to press much more aggressively initially was because they were confident they could either win the ball back or at the very least disrupt the build-up play. That's because when City split like this, it was still Alleyne under pressure, who could quickly be forced backwards. Because as the central centre-back, he was seeing the most of the ball. So once again, City were forced to adapt, and we saw a lot more La Salida La Volpiana from Rodri, so that he would be the central man and become the main progressor of the ball, with either Lewis, Bernardo, or both looking to drop in, whilst the left-hand side looked to compensate. And the temptation when a result like this occurs is to paint a picture that City's in-possession play had no merit, but actually, the reversion to prior season's tactics threatened to be highly effective. It meant that, especially because United's wingers had to begin narrow to prevent the midfield overload, City could still very much overload that backline, often 5 versus 4. This of course meant that whichever side the Blues began their play, the United backline would have to shift across, and that would free the switch as well as the subsequent isolations. And we saw plenty of that in this game, with Semenyo in particular finding himself in 1v1s, but not able to make the most of them. While Diallo on the other side ensured that whenever it was Doku who got an isolation, he was disciplined in dropping in to try and double team the Belgian as much as possible. And here's the thing, part of the reason City were so dominant in the possession stats is that they supported their build-up play all the way into the final third, moving the backline extremely high up the pitch, allowing them to counter-press or win any loose balls if the play broke down outside the United box. The issue, of course, is that this left acres of space behind the backline that United looked to hit on the counter-attack, with the Reds often looking to play it first time into the runners in behind. And we focused on United's great defensive shape and their transitions, but the Reds in controlled possession were a threat as well. And that's because initially in the build-up, City lined up like this, a 4-4-2 with Foden and Haaland being aggressive on the centre-backs, and importantly, Rodri and Bernardo were backing it up by pressing the United pivots. The problem was obvious, as Fernandes would now be able to roam untamed between the lines. And pretty early on, City knew they couldn't allow this to continue and spent the majority of that first half looking for a solution. Initially, it was having Semenyo, rather than being wide, pressing the pivot instead, allowing Rodri to remain deeper between the lines. But there were still issues with this. Firstly, if United were able to play out and maintain possession, it now meant that Semenyo was being forced to operate as a temporary midfielder, which was not optimal. So the fix for this was simple, with Semenyo and Foden switching roles in the press. But that still didn't address the secondary issue. Yes, City could now theoretically be man-to-man in the midfield, but Mbeumo did an excellent job of dropping in between the lines, and this caused several issues. Firstly, because Semenyo was high up pressing centrally, Rico Lewis took up this position, meaning that Kushyanov had to watch the wide man. As a result, Rodri could not fully commit to picking up the man between the lines in case he had to drop in and cover as part of the back four. At the same time, young Alain did not look confident in pushing up to press Mbeumo and leaving space in the backline, meaning that at times the United forward was able to turn and face, and United excelled at finding runners in behind in these situations. It was a confident performance from the Reds, but I want to hear your detailed thoughts about this match and anything else I didn't cover. And if you did enjoy the video, you're obviously a fan of tactics, so if you want to elevate your tactical understanding, sign up for Football Fundamentals through the link down below. Football Fundamentals is my 1-month program that teaches you the basics of tactical analysis for free. Perfect whether you're a beginner or you have a little bit more experience, so check it out down below. What was interesting in this game is how we saw many shades of Pep's old tactics, and if you want to dive deep into how his tactics have evolved in every single season of his career, take a look at this video on screen now.